Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers. To hear that, words have voices. Our host for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very special guest today is former Governor George Nigh, former UCO President George Nigh, a statesman, an author, an all-around, a teacher.
Well, statesman, Harry Truman once said a statesman was a dead politician. So
well, that's premature.
Yeah.
That's premature. So not quite a statesman here. We won't go that far.
And you mentioned teacher. I'm very proud. I used to teach Oklahoma history at McAllister, and people used to ask me, do you think you were a good governor? And I said, I don't know if I was a good governor. That's not for me, but I was a good teacher. I love teaching.
And isn't that important? And then, I couldn't help but think, as I read this new biography of you, Bob Burke's biography, Good Guys Wear White Hats, that your story really parallels the history of Oklahoma. You're very much a product of the history of Oklahoma.
I sometimes kind of pinch myself because I don't think of myself as being an old-timer. Mm-hmm. But, of course, at my age, I am. But when I think that Oklahoma was only a state 20 years before I was born, then I realize how close to the history.
Right.
But I used to sponsor a luncheon with Bob Lee, who was a columnist for the Daily Oklahoma. He and I sponsored for many years what we called the Statehood Babies. And we sponsored an annual luncheon in which we honored everyone born in 1907. And it just amazed me to stand in front of those people and hear their stories and to think that the entire history of the state of Oklahoma had been contained within their lives.
Yeah.
This wasn't, the entire history of the entire state.
Exactly.
And then I think, well, I was just 20 years into that. But it was so much fun to have these people stand up. One of them would say, why, when I was brought into this state on a covered wagon, and they'd say, well, you haven't heard anything yet. Wait till I tell you about me. And it was so much fun. But I am very proud of the history of Oklahoma. And
you've made history in Oklahoma. I mean, you're the first, youngest legislator ever elected, the youngest lieutenant governor, the only governor to serve 4 terms. I mean, it's pretty incredible stuff.
Well, that's I'm very proud of those things, but I'm very appreciative also of the opportunity that Oklahoma gave me to be of service.
I'm sure. I think that comes through in this terrific biography of you, this Good Guys Wear White Hats, that you did always consider it a privilege.
Well, somebody asked me, did I like the book that Bob Burke wrote? And I said, well, didn't he say nice things about me? And they said, yes. I said, I like it.
Yeah, but he didn't shy away from the controversies you faced.
No.
But I learned a lot, I've got to tell you, from viewing the way that you handled tough situations. For example, when there was a sort of a sit-in in the Capitol and you had to make a quick, hard decision. I believe you were a lieutenant governor.
Yeah, that always bothered me, and they thought politically it might have been my undoing at the time.
Let's give a little of the background of that.
Well, I was lieutenant governor, and under Oklahoma Constitution, when the governor is out of state, the lieutenant governor immediately assumes all the duties. You don't wait 2 weeks,
right,
you don't wait 24 hours. You used to put 1 foot across the line going out of the state, and the lieutenant governor is the chief executive. And David Bourne was governor, and he was in New York or someplace. And I was the governor in his absence, and we had a sit-in at the Capitol, and it was a pretty traumatic event. And I'll never forget how I got so deeply involved in it. I didn't even know they were having a sit-in. I just come to the Capitol. The legislature is working late one night. I come to the Capitol, and I see several law enforcement people in a huddle on the first floor of the Capitol, and they were arguing. And I stopped and I said, "What's going on?" They said, "Well, we're having trouble up on the legislative floor, and we're trying to decide who's in charge." And they said the highway patrol was there, and they said they would handle the security. The Capitol Police said no, we'll handle it. Oklahoma City Police were there. They said no, this is in Oklahoma City. And the Sergeant at Arms of the legislature said, none of you have jurisdiction over the legislative floors. We're the Sergeant at Arms. And I finally said, now wait a minute, let me point something out. And they told me what the situation was, and I said, well, let's do it this way. Governor Bourne's out of the state. I'm the governor in his absence. I'm in charge. And we're not going to stand down here and argue over who has authority over a problem that's erupting in the state capitol. And so then there were those who wanted us to go in and bang a few heads and clear out the Capitol corridor from these people who were demonstrating and sitting in. And what they were doing, they were not allowing legislators to come and go from the legislative chambers. They physically blocked it. And there were those who wanted to go in and pull them out. And I said, I don't want on national television a bunch of pictures showing Oklahoma law enforcement people going into a bunch of students, as they were, and roughing them and pulling them and shouting and screaming. I don't want that. And I said, the legislature can continue their work, they just don't have to come out. So I talked to the legislators by phone. It was in the House particularly. They let the senators come and go, but they were blocking the House. And I said, I want to wear this out. I want to go through it quietly. So we negotiated with the students, and finally I just explained to them, I said, now here's the options. You either leave or you're going to be placed under arrest. And that's not my, and they said, well, places under arrest. I said, no, that's not my choice. It's your choice. You decide whether or not you're going to leave, or you decide whether or not you want to be arrested. And finally they left. They didn't want to be arrested. But I got criticized because I didn't move in with force. And in the short haul, they were very critical of me. But in the long haul, I think that's what the book points out too. In the long haul, people appreciated the fact that no big ruckus occurred. Well, while the governor was out of state,
Well, sure. And, one of the things that I think wonderful values of a book like this biography of you is it gives us the long haul view. For example, as I go back and read about all the positions you've had, some of them starting small. When you first a legislator, you voted to allow women to be on juries. Then, when you were governor, appointed women, Jeanette Edmondson to be Secretary of State, Norma Eagle to be on the Corporation Commission, first woman, and 2 women to the Supreme Court, first women to be appointed. That's a great legacy.
When I appointed Alma Wilson as the first female justice on the Supreme Court, I said something then that I remember very clearly, is that it wasn't that I appointed the first woman to the Supreme Court. The most important thing was it was the first woman who had not been turned down because she was a woman.
That's good.
And I said, I look forward to the day when a governor just stands here and says, I've appointed this person, and you don't have to say it's the first black or the first Asian or the first older citizen or the first female. I said, you just say, this is my appointment. Another thing I did, that I was active in trying to lower the voting age to 18. I was in what we called LOVE, Let Us Vote. And then I was in LOVE, L-O-V-E, lower Oklahoma voting to 18. And we were successful in that because I thought that, back to the point, if you're old enough to serve in military service and the war, etc., you're old enough to vote to elect your county commissioner.
Well, I was wondering about that because when I noticed your stand for that, I wondered if that was one of your reasons for being. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I just thought if that's when the government, that was an age when the government in World War II could mandatorily make you go into an armed service. And I thought it was silly. We send somebody overseas to fight, many of them to die, and for 3 years they weren't even eligible to vote. And so, but also one of my appointments, and I don't remember if it's in the book or not, one of my appointments was when I became governor, we had a commission on the status of youth.
Oh, yes.
Children and youth.
Yes.
And I looked, and the youngest person on that commission was 30-some-odd years old. I appointed a high school student. And that she became as a high school student, she was serving on a state commission. And when her junior year at OU, she was state chairman of the Commission on Children and Youth. And I just think that everybody should be given the opportunity to serve. you shouldn't deny it. Now, let me point out real clearly, I don't think you ever should appoint anybody to any position because they're a youth, or they're male, or they're female, or they're Jewish, or they're Italian, or they're Catholic. But I don't think that should be a right of denial.
No. Absolutely. I think that's a good point. I again think that comes out well in the book. And you mentioned you've been the subject of some controversy. You're remembered as our most popular governor. And yet you've been the subject of some controversy over the years. Very interesting statistic in this book that there's been more written about you in the Daily Oklahoman than any other human being. And now this biography is written about you. What's it like to be such a public person?
Well, that surprised me when they said that I was the most frequently mentioned name in the Daily Oklahoman. That really did surprise me. But then I got to thinking, well, I've been around 50 years in public office, so if they just mentioned it once a year, that gets to be a lot. A lot of that has to do with the job that, as lieutenant governor, I probably more than most lieutenant governors at that time, got mentioned a lot, because when I ran for lieutenant governor in 1958, I said my main campaign platform was I'd make it a full-time job.
Yes, I remember that.
When I became lieutenant governor, you look at Mary Fallon today and you see the responsibility in that office as lieutenant governor, and you see her staff and security and the boards and commissions that she serves on, and the attention she gets as lieutenant governor. When I ran for lieutenant governor in 59 and got in 58 and got elected and took office in 59, I shared an office with two senators. I had a part-time secretary during the legislative session. I had no driver, no security, no aide, no assistant. I had a half-time secretary. And that's the number 2 position in the state. And I said, if nothing else, my mission was to make that job important. And so just think, that's a heartbeat away from being the most important office in the state. And it was a throwaway office.
And you could see that, as your career bore this out, that a couple of times you did have to step in and become governor on short notice.
But the point we were making is that activity as lieutenant governor in that period of time, and generally a lieutenant governor wouldn't have been mentioned much, but I was 16 years lieutenant governor, and so there was a lot of times when I just kept forcing the issue, the lieutenant governor is going to be more important, more important. And then, of course, as governor, you get mentioned a lot, one way or another.
A lot. And, I was so interested in your legislative race, which was prior to your becoming lieutenant governor. You had a way of kind of knowing how to get your name out. First of all, you went everywhere. You shook hands with everyone. You're elected as a legislator. And you're the youngest person in the legislature. And there's a funny story about when you would go down to collect your check or something, they thought you were a page.
Well, the first time I went to get in those days, you got paid every 10 days. I don't know why. But you got paid every 10 days, and you had to go around to the financial office at the legislature and pick up your check. So the first time I went, they said, we have a rule that only members can pick up their paycheck. And I said, I am a member. And they said, we're not giving you somebody else's paycheck. I had to go get help to come back and introduce me. This is a full-fledged member. But the funny one was Frank Truill was the chief sergeant at arms, and we were waiting one day to go in session, and so we were kind of shooting the bull in a little pocket before the speaker called the meeting to order. And I'm back there with these old timers, who some of them had gray hair, and all of them were a lot older than I. And the chief sergeant at arms called me over, and he said, you quit hanging around those guys, you get to work, you put the water and coffee out, and if I see you with them again, you won't be here anymore. And so I had to go get another member. I said, would you go tell him I'm a member?
That's a rich
And so
story.
then they made me, then they stopped the session, put a badge on me, and made me an honorary page for that day.
And it was during that time, too, wasn't it, that you introduced the bill to make Oklahoma our state song?
Yes, very proud of that. I said we needed to do what the world had done for us, and that's put enthusiasm in our state. And the best thing we could do was to take what Rogers and Hammerstein had done for us and take Oklahoma and make it so critical a part of ours. And when OU played in the Orange Bowl and won the national championship, the song that you heard, other than Boomer Sooner, was Oklahoma.
Yes.
And anywhere you go around the world, they play Oklahoma.
It's a beautiful song.
Yeah. And it was a natural for us. I just was lucky enough to be the one who altered the bill. But the book is very generous. I had 32 years in public office, And I'm very proud, of course, of having been governor, and all of them, but people have been good to me, and I, in turn, hope that I've been reasonable for the state.
Well, everyone seems to feel that way and have the highest regard for you. You've got to call up another funny story from the book. Is when you're running for lieutenant governor, and this was before you've been hitting the Oklahomans regularly. You need a little publicity to get your name out. You camp out on the Capitol lawn.
Well, I had been teaching high school at McAllister, and all my students were campaigning for me. I had people would say, I wasn't planning on voting for you, but anybody who has their students out campaigning. I said, well, it's motivation. I had a slogan, campaign or flunk. And but my brother had a bus line, a rural bus line in McAllister, and so he took one of his buses and painted it up with Nigh on it. And a lot of my former students then went on that bus, and for weeks I'd take these students, would go out every weekend when they weren't in school or every holiday, and they would go they came into Stillwater, Kermit, where we're filming this. Kermit Ingham and some others made it possible. They fed us bologna sandwiches at the courthouse. We were here under a tornado alert. I remember that. But these kids, these students, and that really was meaningful to me, because they'd say any teacher that can get their kids out campaigning for them.
Well, and what I liked about it, I've got to tell you, we see a lot of apathy among young people today, and there was this sense with you and these group of young people that you felt you could enact change and make a difference.
And what we ended up doing that you were referring to, I was trying to get some publicity because no one had ever heard of me. So we went to the Capitol and pitched a pup tent, and all the kids slept out on the Capitol grounds and next to the sign that says keep off the grass. And of course what happened that we expected. The press came out and photographed all this, and somebody was saying, you can't do this. And I said, well, when my opponent can always be on the inside, I think at least I should be able to be on the outside. But it was hokey, but it worked.
Well, it worked. It's a great story, and it's one of those stories that stands the test of time. I thought, gosh, you can't help but admire somebody. Made me want to vote for you all over again.
But, when you're running for some offices, people just, well, for almost any office, I think, people just want to feel good about their candidate. Mm-hmm. And that's what I tried to do is just to, like when I was running for the legislature and lieutenant governor particularly, just have people feel good about it. And you didn't have so many issues. But now running for governor is a whole different matter, because you've got to specifically address the issue. The number one issue being lieutenant governor, and I made my campaign is that I want to be the insurance policy you never have to cash. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That I just will be prepared to be governor, but I won't act like governor.
But then you became governor.
Then I became governor.
Under some different strange circumstances, when Senator Kerr died and Howard Edmondson stepped down and you became governor. Then again, when Governor Boren.
Strangely enough, two governors went to the United States Senate while I was lieutenant governor. So I had two terms. One was for 9 days. As I said, I had the 10-day virus and missed the whole thing. That was Edmondson. And then Boren for 5 days. And so when I started my third term as governor, I'd only been governor 14 days.
And you'd had one loss in between that time.
Yes.
In a primary. What did you learn from that? I can't help but think you're the sort of guy who would learn from that experience.
Well, I learned from that experience. 1962, I was lieutenant governor, having served my first term. Howard Edmondson was governor. He couldn't run again. So my gut feeling was I didn't want to run for governor. I wanted to run for re-election for lieutenant governor, and a bunch of my supporters and friends, we sat around, and I let them convince me that I should make the race for governor. Now, I'm not saying anything other than my gut feeling told me, don't do this. Mm-hmm. You're not ready. Mm-hmm. And I've said many times in retrospect, in 1962, I probably wouldn't have voted for myself, because I wouldn't, even though I'd been lieutenant governor, I really wasn't ready to be governor. I thought it was. Mm-hmm. They convinced me I was, but in reflection, I know that I wasn't. And it made me a better person, because then I thought, I'm going to run again someday. I went back and ran for re-election as lieutenant governor, served 12 years then as lieutenant governor. But I would never run against an incumbent. So only when Boren said he wasn't going to run again, then did I run as lieutenant governor for governor. But I had a lot of time to study and observe not only campaigns but service. And let me make a point here to the viewers. if I can. Public service starts many times with running for office. And you want to make sure that your candidate not only wants to be elected, but he wants to serve.
That's a really, serve is for,
Serve.
it's a job of service and not one of pomp, and even though that sometimes comes along with
Serving
it.
is tough.
I bet it is, and you had to make some hard decisions as governor. What were some of the hardest decisions you had to make as governor? Certainly, I imagine pardons that you issued were difficult.
Well, no, they weren't so difficult. I didn't make any recommendation on a pardon or a parole. I didn't take any unless the board that reviewed it officially recommended them to me. So I never initiated anything on my own. I never explained why I did or did not sign a parole. I told the press I'm not going to explain it. I told family members I'm not telling you why I didn't sign it. That's just a job as governor. You either sign it or you don't sign it, and I'm not required to give any reason. So I just made the decision, and that was not tough for me. The tough one was for me. I was governor during the best of times, and then during the worst of times. The oil crisis that came, or the energy, the failure of revenue in 1982 and in the early 83s, is that I held off for 2 years. When the economy just went in a handbasket, and I held off for 2 years resisting tax increase. I'd given 17 in the legislature, and I'd given 17 tax cuts my first term as governor. I got reelected, and we had a failure of revenue in the state because of the price of oil and wheat and beef, and everything went down. And there were those who called for tax increases. I said, I can't. I don't want to. And we struggled for 2 years. But finally one day when they came in and said, we're going to have to pull highway patrol cars over to the side of the road because we don't have enough money to pay their gasoline. We're going to have to not hire teachers next year because we don't have enough money. I said, okay, we're going to have a tax increase. I'm not going to close. Who was it? Nero. I didn't come emperor of Rome to preside over its demise, and I didn't become governor of Oklahoma to preside over its demise. So I had the most difficult decision I had to make was to look the people of Oklahoma in the eye and say, we have to have a tax increase.
And as I look back here, you've had many great successes as governor, tourism and highway building and education. If you could point to one thing that you're especially pleased with, what would it be?
Well, there are always, no politician wants to always say that there's one answer. So let me say there are two areas. The most pleasing thing that ever happened to me as a politician was being reelected as governor, much more than being elected governor to begin with. Once you run on your record and people say, hey, I liked that, and then they vote for you, that's a good feeling. It's good to win, but it's even better to say, hey, we like that. Not politically, but serving, a category I say we did a lot for special people who had special needs. So I want to group those together. We created the first Office of Handicap Concerns in the United States of America, the first one ever. We renovated every veteran center that we had in Oklahoma and built a new one. When I became governor, we had one group home for mentally retarded. My wife, Donna, that was her mission.
Yes.
When I left office, we had 100 group homes for what we now call the developmentally disabled. We built a library for the blind. The thing I'm proudest of as governor is that I can take about 10 areas of people who had special needs that we addressed for the first time. At-home care for people who don't need to be in a hospital but need help. We created that. So my pride is in those special.
And they've been lasting accomplishments.
Yeah,
that's got to be the good feeling.
You got another book there.
Oh, yes, Oklahoma, too. David Fisher, you wrote the introduction to that. And, of course, tourism is one of your accomplishments. And I thought you captured the essence of Oklahoma in this wonderful essay you wrote about it. But you pretty much lived this. I mean, and your campaign trails, you've been to most of these places.
Well, in every campaign, I visited all 77 counties. And in every term in office, I visited all 77 counties. But actually, this Oklahoma 2 book, although it has my name on it, essay by George Nigh, that's in small print. The big print is David Fitzgerald, one of the most outstanding photographers. Outstanding. And he has this coffee table book. He did one called Oklahoma, and the publisher said it was so successful they asked him to do another one, so they named it Oklahoma 2. And I was flattered. He came to me and asked me, would I write the essay for it? And I said, well, sure, I'm very flattered to do that. And then I made an agreement with the publishers and with them. I didn't want to write about his photography. And so I was sitting, and they wanted me to write this formal essay. And so I was sitting at the computer and the typewriter and typing the essay and doing it correctly. And I said, this isn't coming together. So I called David Fitzgerald and I said, I just want to kind of visit instead of writing a formal. And he said, well, call the publisher. So I called the publisher and the editors. And I said, I want to start over. Throw away what I've sent you. I want permission to just write it as old George wants to talk about Oklahoma. Nothing to do with the pictures, but just about yarns and stories and things in Oklahoma. So the unusual thing about this Oklahoma 2 book, it's a fabulous pictorial capture of the state of Oklahoma by David Fitzgerald. And they let me just write about anything I wanted to write about.
And it captures the essence of Oklahoma. Governor Nigh, I'm so sorry we've run out of time, and I could talk to you for several days,
well,
non-stop. But we must add, too, that you went on to become the president of UCO and that you're very active in a number of things. And I think it's a great tribute to you that now we've recorded your life as an inspiration to others in this new book that Bob Burke wrote called Good Guys Wear White Hats. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm honored.
And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.
Writing Out Loud is underwritten by
Koch Industries. Koch is a proud employer of nearly 1,000 Oklahomans. Koch Industries, you know us better than you think.
Nielsen's, proudly providing fine crystal, porcelain, and gifts for over 50 years. We are Tulsa's exclusive gift shop.